Hi, I'm Todd Jones, host of the podcast Press Box Access. Here's a clip from my interview with David Steele. David takes us on the campus of University of Maryland in June 1986 when news spread about the tragic death of Len Bias. You know, you were there when Len Bias was playing basketball. And, you know, for young people today, he might be sort of a name they remember, but Len Bias was the number one pick of the Boston Celtics in 1986, and then tragically died of cocaine intoxication. When you think about your days at Maryland, what do you remember about Len Bias? You know, covering him as a student journalist.
One, he was a local guy. He was from, literally lived 10 minutes from campus. One of the area legends in high school, but still one of those players that you knew what he could possibly be. Once he got there. But he really had kind of only scratched the surface. And once he got there, you could see the flashes of it as a freshman. And then sophomore year was the year that they won the ACC tournament for the first time. And I think it was like 27 years, something like that. And he was the MVP, and he just completely blew up in the tournament. Went crazy in the championship game against Duke. And that's really when he kind of put his feet on the path toward becoming just a legend. And, you're a kid at the time as well. I was a year ahead of him scholastically, but you knew how great he could possibly be, and he just became just this magnetic presence all over campus, and you just knew that with all the great players that were that had played for that school, that he was on path to maybe be the best of all time. I mean, better than the John Lucases and the Len Elmores and all those players. And he just kept getting better and better because we'd seen him compete against the Michael Jordans and all those kind of players. He beat Duke, he beat North Carolina. He was the greatest player we had ever seen, and he just felt like he was one of us. You mentioned magnetic on campus. Well, what was he like personally? Everybody felt like they could approach him. He was really friendly to everybody. He felt like he was, it felt like he was sort of involved in what everybody does. He never really shied away or hesitated from talking to you. And again, you forget how young these guys are. So he's like 18, 19 years old, but still felt perfectly fine, talking, after games, in between games, going to practice. You'd see him somewhere in one of the dining halls or in the student union or something like that. People could talk to him. He didn't sort of detach himself from everybody else, although that's sort of the nature of college athletes. They're going to be removed from, and that's to a certain extent. They got their own dorm and their own training table and all those things. But he felt like he was still in the mix. It never felt at any point like, it all went to his head that he was this phenomenal player that was going to just take over, when he got to the NBA. Yeah, and then he gets drafted number one overall. Yeah, me and my friends had like a little draft party at one of our friends' apartments. Wow. the day of the draft, because we couldn't wait to see him pick. Because you grew up in College Park, right? I grew up in the D.C. area. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, then June 19th, 1986. Where were you, and what's your memory of hearing the news? My mom was still living in an apartment in Tacoma Park, which is, again, right near, not that far from College Park. I was home for the summer because I graduated and I'd started working at what at the time was the St. Petersburg Independent, which is the evening paper. I'd come home to visit. My brother was taking summer school classes with a friend of ours. And I was literally just waking up that morning. And it was like I think it was like a Thursday morning. I was just waking up, so we're talking about like 8 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And my brother and his friend come busting into the apartment, said, literally, did you hear about Len Bias? And what we knew at the time was, he went up to Boston the day before to negotiate his Reebok contract and go meet with the organization and all these things. And so we're thinking, did he get his big contract already? Blah, 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 blah. And they said, he's dead. And we're like, what? I mean, to put myself back in that moment now, all these years later, it's hard to believe it's been almost 40 years. It just sounded so insane and so incongruous. It's like, dead? What do you mean dead? Like, what happened? What, car accident, plane crash, hit by a meteor? What are you talking about, dead? And so, of course, we turn on the TV And not only the local news was like all over it at the hospital and stuff, but all the national news, all the national stations, they broke into regular programming to report this. And that just blew us away. And we're like, what, we're just like freaking out going on. And they were showing the shots at the hospital, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, of them carrying his body out of the emergency room, covered by a sheet, this huge 6'8", this Olympian, Herculean body under a sheet. And they were, and it's hard to even think about it now. Like that, how did you talk about it? But seeing his teammates in the waiting room at the hospital just falling apart, just in tears. Keith Gatlin, I mean, he was, those two were just this incredible tandem, point guard and forward, throwing up the lobs to him. And, he was just bawling and just had his hands up to his head, and the players were just in shock. And we just kept watching, trying to figure what happened. And they said heart attack. And that didn't make any sense either, because how could this guy's heart fail him? And we didn't know what to do. I mean, a bunch of us ended up going up to campus and just sort of wandering around. And there was a billion students wandering around, just numb. And this is the middle of the summer, so there was still a lot of students up there for classes and stuff.
Right.
Some of us went over to Cole Fieldhouse, which is still open. That was still the basketball facility at the time, and we just sat there staring at the court. Lefty Driesell did a little press conference in the lobby. He was in tears. He kept talking about, "Oh, Leonard, I'll see you in heaven one day," and it was just unbelievable scene. And of course, there were TV cameras all over the place. There were TV trucks just circling all over the place nonstop, trying to pull people aside, trying to do talks and things like that. So we run out of things to think about. And we go home and we're watching all the nonstop coverage again. And I'll never forget on Channel 9, the CBS affiliate here in DC, and it was Gordon Peterson was the anchor. They come on with another special report, and all of a sudden the word cocaine comes out of his mouth. That cocaine was found in his room or found on the premises and at his dorm room. And that just put us all away. We were just done after that, because that just talk about things making absolutely no sense. We're like, how, what does that mean? And from then on, I mean, literally almost from that moment until today, it's just been this, he was pretty much from that moment on just going to be anchored into history, just cemented into this entire narrative about, loss and wasted opportunity and the perils of drugs. It became a cautionary tale. A lot of people no longer found it tragic. They started mocking him. And of course, just the fact that you said that you were a graduate or a student at University of Maryland, that became a black mark against you. It tainted you for years and years and years after that, because that was the school that got Len Bias coked up and killed, after this incredible career, and cut his life and his career and his future short. What kind of university you guys have down there? So
you went to the funeral, right? Did you attend
I went to the funeral,
service at
and
Cole Fieldhouse?
There was a big memorial service there. Red Auerbach was there. They held up the jersey that he would have worn. I never remember, because he would have worn number 30. Jesse Jackson spoke. Lefty Driesell spoke. There were teammates there, and his mom spoke, Len Bias. And a lot of us, even though we'd been around the team and covered them and stuff, we didn't really know the families that well. I'm sure that the people at the Post and the and the TV stations probably got to know the family, but we're students, so we knew him basically. But so this is the first time we'd seen his mother, and she just gave this absolutely riveting speech about how he was going to continue to live on, and the lessons that we were going to learn from him, and that he was going to speak to the youth, and she was never going to let down and never let people forget who he was and what he meant and what he died for. And it was just still to this day one of the most riveting speeches I'd ever seen. And
20 years later, you met up with his mother, and you were a columnist at the Baltimore Sun, and you wrote a beautiful piece about it. When you reflect back on that meeting with his mother 20 years after her son's death, what do you recall?
I think what's always going to stick out to me is that I sat down with her in person. She was doing some stuff with some federal anti-drug organizations and things like that. Just to be able to sit and meet her face to face and talk to her about everything that she had done for 20 years, and to also just talk about what that moment was like for her, how she was still driven to try to change people's lives and to put them back on the right path and to learn a lesson from what happened. And one of the things that we really have to remember as well as part of this story is that a few years after Lenny died, her younger son, Jay, was shot to death in this crazy, just so, some guy came up to him jealous about something. It was about some woman and shot him in a mall nearby. And he was just on the cusp of, moving on in his basketball career, getting scholarship offers, things like that, again, really, really young. And that just sort of broke everybody. We're just like, how could, why would you do this to this family? So, a second time like this. So we talked a lot about that as well. And I think what stuck out for me most is that at the end of the conversation, after we'd done all the interviews, I turned off my recorder. I was getting ready to leave. And I told her, I've never had a chance to tell you how sorry I am for losing your two sons, especially Len, because I know him. And she said, thank you so much. And I hugged her. And that's when I lost it. I just started bawling like crazy and I don't know how I to this day, I don't know how she continues to give these speeches and meet these people and get involved personally with so many people's lives and not break down constantly herself. But I totally broke down when, that at that on that day and in that moment, because I just, it was one of those times you just really couldn't hold back your feelings and, just understand the humanity of what you're talking about, that they're more than, for me, they're always more than just a story and a byline and, a clip and things like that. I mean, had become an intimate part of my life, from a really young age. And here I am 20 years later, grown man, well into my career, covering, sports full time, but living in a world that lost Len Bias in that way and being involved with the family and speaking to them face to face. And that was a lot for me that hit me really hard at that moment. And, I'm glad I got a chance to sort of express that to her. And I've had a chance to see her a few times since then and speak to her. She's still a great speaker. She still is very moved to do all these things. She's still motivated. She's still driven, and she still has the same goal. So,
yeah. So Len does live on in that way. I
absolutely.
mean, it's so horrible that he has to live on in that fashion to be an example of the dangers, but that's how he lives on.
Certainly in this particular case, I mean, not just me, but I think everybody who was involved and engaged at that time and in that moment has really kind of felt a responsibility to sort of carry on his story, tell his story to the next generations and make people understand his legacy. And, and you said it right. I mean, a lot of people just sort of know him as a name and they don't know, the background of it. And the more the years go by and the more the anniversaries get bigger and bigger, the more you feel compelled to say, this is what he was like. He wasn't just a name. He wasn't just a cautionary tale. He wasn't just somebody who, you've heard about and you've connected him with drugs and, time to move on and let's stop talking about him, stop dragging us around like that. It's like, no, it's,
right.
His life and what happened to it is a defining moment for that entire generation of people and of students and people in the metro area and of journalists who grew up at that time. And I think if you ask any of those who were in that class, they would tell you the same thing.